record.
All right, here we go. In 3, 2. Well, hello and welcome into New York's Asset Protection Roundtable, a 3 pillars of protection program. We're joined as always by Ted Alatsis over at the Alatsis Law Firm in Brooklyn, New York. And today we're going to answer your questions from the mailbag. Got some good follow-up questions from our last episode. We talked quite a bit about taxes and the different kind of categories of taxes that you need to consider when you're going through your estate plan. So I encourage you to go back and listen to that one if you haven't yet. And I think some really good information there, including a really good little anecdote about George Steinbrenner for Yankees fans as well. So I enjoyed that for sure. Ted, welcome in. How are you today?
Doing great, Ben. Hope you're doing well.
I am indeed. And I look forward to today's conversation. I always like to hear what people are curious about and asking about following up on an episode. But I want to lead off with our legalese of the day. We've been doing this for a few episodes and just kind of highlighting a word that might come up during your process of estate planning with an attorney. And today's one that I think most people are probably familiar with, but always good to add a little clarity, and that's capital gain.
Yeah, absolutely. Capital gain is one of those things that people ask about all the time, and essentially, capital gain is the profit you realize when you sell an asset that's essentially an investment. So you realize a profit when you actually make a sale, when you actually do a transaction for money. So, for example, I think probably the best way to describe it is with an example. Let's say you own a home, right? A 2-family house, let's say, and you bought it for about $300,000, and now it's worth $1 million, and you go to sell it. Okay, that's $700,000 between the sale, the purchase price, and the sale price. That's the capital gain. Okay, and capital gains tax is the tax that's assessed against that realized profit.
I know a lot of people get upset about capital gains, and I know we've seen a lot of conversation. It can be political, and a lot of conversation about higher capital gains taxes or when to apply capital gains taxes. I think in some sense on that, but I know we covered it a little bit in our last episode on taxes. So make sure you go back and listen to that one. But it's always the bottom line. I think it's always good to, if you're paying capital gains taxes, it's not a bad thing because it means you made some money.
That's exactly right. Although certainly sometimes because it's such a high percentage, it's one of those things that really annoys someone who has to pay it.
Yep, there's no question about that. It definitely cuts into the profit that you made, but ultimately you still came out ahead. So
absolutely,
capital gain, that's our legalese of the day. All right, let's move into our mailbag, and got a few questions that came in to the show. And we'll start off with one from Eric. He says, "My parents are very wealthy. When they die, will I be taxed on what I inherit, and what do I need to watch out for?"
Eric, that's a great question, and it's all going to depend on a lot of different things, right? So first of all, when you say very wealthy, it's going to depend on how wealthy. So that's number one. Secondly, it's going to depend on the number and the value of the assets and the type of assets that we're talking about. And then third, we're going to be talking about what who the beneficiaries are, because all of that's going to factor in. There are circumstances where if the estate's over 12, if it's your parents together, okay, and they die together, then together they can give away as part of their estate a little over $24 million without there being any form of death or estate tax. If one parent were to pass away first, then depending on how their estate was structured, and it were to go to the other parent, or a good portion of it would go to the other parent, then whatever portion that would go to their spouse would not be taxable. And so depending on whether the remainder is under that $12 million, then that's going to determine whether estate taxes are due, for example. So there are lots of different questions that need to be answered before a definitive answer can be given to you, Eric. But the circumstances are going to determine a lot of the answers to those questions.
If Eric's parents were clients of yours, Ted, do you try to get the children involved at all in the process? And just in terms of having them looped in on kind of what to expect, maybe things they can be doing to get prepared, kind of basically answering a couple of these questions earlier on in the process.
So it's going to start really with their parents first, because if the parents are my clients, then that the conversation has to start with them, right? So they have to understand, that there are potential consequences to their children, and so planning things accordingly is an important part of this, right? So I would certainly recommend, when I counsel the parents, to include the children in these discussions for sure, and then have an honest understanding of what the overall goal of whatever planning that's going to take place is, because you know there may be circumstances where we may want to skip a generation with some things, just to defer some of those taxes or to avoid some of those taxes, and so their cooperation, their understanding would be an important part of that. So yeah, I would think of having them involved in the process is a great idea, but it really starts with the parents and making sure that they understand that makes a lot of sense.
All right, very good, Eric. Thank you for that question. We do appreciate it. But again, follow up with an attorney to really go through and go through the specifics of that situation and help you out a little bit more. Again, you can always get in touch with Ted, alatsaslawfirm.com. All right, Julia is next here on our mailbag. Says, I have Apple stock that I bought a long time ago. Congratulations on that. It's in pretty good shape. Stock price is much higher now. My investment advisor told me I would have a huge capital gains tax if I sold it. What can I do to make sure my children pay as little tax as possible?
Julia, that's a great question. And as an Apple stockholder myself, I'm very happy to hear that you're an owner of Apple stock. I'm a big fan of Jim Cramer on CNBC, and his mantra is you own Apple stock, you don't trade it. And I wouldn't sell it even if you had a huge gain, like you're saying. But that's a whole other conversation. With regards to what to do though for your children, I mean, certainly, one of the great advantages of holding on to an asset like stock or other investment assets, and then making sure it goes to your beneficiaries when you're gone, is that they receive something called the step up in basis. What that essentially means is that they get the fair market value of the asset upon your death. So they would not be required to pay any capital gains tax on those assets. And so there's a huge benefit to holding on to it, and putting the asset as part of your estate, and making sure it goes to your beneficiaries. I certainly would recommend probably doing some sort of trust of some kind, certainly. But at the end of the day, if you can hold out and hold on to it, then that would be by far the best outcome for your children.
I'm guessing this is probably a scenario that you come across quite a bit, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Especially if someone's been investing for a long time, or has been, doing, um, having has a buy and hold strategy with regards to their stock portfolio or something of that nature. For sure. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Thank you for that question, Julia. We do appreciate you sending it in. Final question today comes in from Pax, who says, I have a very high net worth and my estate will most likely be subject to tax when I die. Is there anything I can do to avoid that apart from spending my money or losing money in the stock market?
Well, Pax, that's a great question. So it's going to depend a lot on how much is in the estate. Okay, and there are planning tools that can be used to defer some of those taxes. There are other tools that you can use to kind of fund the payment of those taxes by kind of calculating how much, or estimating how much those taxes would be, and funding those taxes with an insurance policy, for example, some sort of trust where those funds would be available for that purpose. And then there would be other things that we could use as tools to try to avoid some of those taxes. And that would certainly involve using your state goals, as well as having a real understanding of your ultimate desires with where you want your estate to go. And sometimes you may want to skip a generation, or do some other creative planning to try to avoid some of those taxes. It's also going to depend, on your marital status, as well, because that's another tool that can be used, in terms of planning your estate and avoiding some of those taxes. So, all of those things that I just mentioned are part of any kind of plan that, would be implemented in terms of trying to figure out how to avoid some of those taxes.
All right, very good. Thank you for that question, Pax, Julia, and Eric today. We do appreciate you, and thanks for being a part of the podcast. If you have questions for us, you can send it in. Alatsis.lawfirm.com. That is the website. There's some other great resources there as well. So while you're there, if you're there to schedule a meeting, go ahead and look around a little bit. You'll find some things that can benefit you and help educate you more when it comes to estate planning. But if you have questions, always feel free to call as well. 718-233-2903 is the number for Latsis Law Firm. All right, Ted, as always, great to talk with you once again. And I know for anyone looking to get around taxes, or at least try to save as much of their money as possible, is always encourage them to work with an estate planning attorney to do so.
Ben, thanks for talking, and we'll talk to you next month.
Sounds good. Thanks for listening to New York's Asset Protection Roundtable, a 3 Pillars of Protection program. For Ted Alatis, I am Ben George. We'll talk to you on the next episode. Take care.